I read somewhere, probably on True Achievements, let's be honest, that Tell Me Why was being given out for free this Pride Month, and I wasn't quite sure why. If only someone could tell me. But no matter, I wasn't about to pass up 1500 free gamer score. I knew very, very little about the game. I knew it was an Xbox exclusive developed by Don't Nod Entertainment, the studio famous for the Life is Strange franchise, a series I've never played myself but that I know quite a bit about. I knew it involved some sort of mystery and some sort of memory-based magic, and that it was set somewhere snowy. That's it. I didn't know why I got this game free for Pride Month, but it became pretty clear within the first couple of minutes. Tell Me Why is about twins Tyler and Allison and their psychic power-assisted investigation into what happened the night their mother died. It's also, for me, a personal first. It's the first game I've ever played with a trans protagonist. Tyler is a trans man. The game doesn't hide that, it doesn't shy away from it, it forces you to engage with the transness of the story. And that is, to say the least, a new experience for me. Before we get into this, I should be clear that I am cisgendered, or cis, meaning I am the gender I was born as opposed to someone who is transgendered who isn't the same gender they were born as. What that means for this video is that this is not an analysis of Tell Me Why through the lens of good trans representation. I honestly have no idea if it is or not. I'll look it up afterwards, but I'm not qualified to tell you that. What I will and can only do is talk from my perspective. Most of my understanding of trans people comes from the media I consume. I don't know that many trans people in person, and I don't think that's a very uncommon situation. There's two major reasons we say that representation matters. The first is that it's good for people to see people like them represented in culture, to see heroes that look like them. But the other reason is for people like me. It's very easy to otherize a group of people that you know nothing about, and you'd be surprised how powerful representation can be. How many minds can be changed by one good depiction of a minority group. I think Tyler from Tell Me Why is an excellent example of that, and I want to talk about it, but first I want to issue a content warning. This game delves into some dark topics involving mental health issues and, of course, transphobia, and if you're not in the mood to deal with that today, I perfectly understand. Also, if you are trans, then I expect that a lot of the things I discussed with wide-eyed amazement in this video will be extremely obvious to you. Try to bear with my ignorant cis perspective, yeah? Tell Me Why is set in a fictional small town somewhere in Alaska, and the game leans into that small town vibe in a few key ways. There's one shop in town, and the shop owner is also running for mayor. Everybody knows everyone. Most people in town are on a first name basis with the sheriff. It's very cozy. It also emits that constant low-key conservative vibe, not in that Fox News kind of way, but just in that way where you can feel a low-level tension with your very existence. Well, I can't. Nobody in this town would have any problems with me, bar maybe being an atheist. But Tyler can feel that tension, especially since because he's a local, everybody knows about his transition. And as a character you play, you can very easily feel that tension yourself. Video games as an interactive form of media can communicate ideas and emotions in a much more personal way than passive media such as movies or TV shows can. There's a massive yet hard to describe difference between watching someone receive transphobic abuse and having that abuse hurled directly at you, or at least someone you have control over. But abuse isn't even quite the right word. Bar one example, which we'll get to, the game never throws an explicit transphobe your way. The game's grace in showing that it's more complicated than that is what makes it such an interesting experience for a cis person like me. I understand the concept of a bigot. I've been on the internet. I don't know what it is to be surrounded by quiet bigotry, the people who don't shout and scream about it on Twitter. Very early in the game, you're riding the ferry across the lake with Tyler and Allison, with perspective currently locked on Tyler. There's one other guy riding the ferry, an older gentleman who you can strike up a conversation with. He's cordial enough, but the gun stickers on his car tell you a lot of what you need to know about him. He tells you he's visiting family, he makes a weird reference about sharing a name with a musician you've never heard of, and then he asks you what your name is, and you have two possible choices. Tyler or Tyler Ronan? What's really interesting is that this question, as ambiguous as what's your name, has an entire meta level which is only relevant if the person answering it is trans. This guy is a local, and due to the circumstances of the Ronan's childhood, the Ronan twins are well known. This is no simple formality. What this question is really asking you is, do you want to let this guy know that you're trans? Do you see this gun-loving older conservative guy and think, fuck it, letting him realise this is not worth the effort? Or do you push it, say your name loud and proud and see what the guy thinks of it? The conversation ends awkwardly either way. If you just say Tyler, then he's a little bit suspicious, and if you use your full name, then he has an extremely awkward moment of realisation before wrapping up the conversation.
Ronan, huh? Ronan as in the Ronans?
Uh-huh.
So, I never knew those girls had a brother.
We didn't. Nice talk.
Yeah.
This tiny, almost completely insignificant interaction is a perfect example of why video game representation is so powerful. It made me completely overthink a question as simple as, what is your name? It's like the most basic interaction you can have with a stranger. And it's a question that I would never in a million years think to overanalyze. The worst I have to worry about is that they'll think I'm a cabbage. I will never know what it's like to experience this. But I'll also never know what it's like to save the galaxy from aliens or ride across the Old West on horseback. Video games are built on giving us these experiences that would be impossible in real life, and that's what makes them such a powerful tool for representation. This minuscule choice forced me to think about the trans experience in a way that I never had before, and the game is full of small moments like this. Tessa is an important character in the game. She was an old friend of the twins' mother, Mary Ann, and she has a lot of information to learn about the mystery. She's also a hardcore conservative Christian. We're talking Bible study hosting hardcore. Later on, you even learn from Michael, Allison's gay best friend, that Tessa removes any sort of pride poster he attempts to put up. But what makes the interactions with Tessa interesting is that she's actually quite nice. She's a very helpful sort of person, even if she's not willing to talk about the details of Marianne's death. It's very, very easy to make a bigot hateable. You can have them shout a bunch of offensive shit, and that's generally fine. Well, it's not fine, but you get what I mean. You're generally not supposed to empathise with a bigot. Making a bigot likeable, or if not likeable, then sympathetic, is much more difficult. Whether that's something we should try and do is a different question, and not one I think that I am equipped to answer. On my end, it's another part of the game that forces me to consider being trans in this kind of situation. Tessa never says anything even implicitly transphobic, and beyond the shock when she first sees Tyler, she never actually brings it up at all. But you as a player and Tyler as a character know that she stands firmly against his very existence. Back in the day, she gave Marianne a pamphlet for conversion therapy. Yikes! How does somebody sit there and engage in polite conversation with someone who they know for sure despises their existence? Or maybe even more condescendingly thinks they've been swayed by the devil into mutilating their body or whatever other nonsense. That's not something I can never know, but via the power of video games, it's now an experience I can at least understand. There were 2 points in the game where I had to properly get up, walk around, and consider what I wanted to do. One of these was the final climactic choice in the game, which is probably fair enough. The other one was, well, I'm just gonna restate my transphobia warning and show you.
This is our house.
Was I talking to you?
Sam, put the gun down. This is Tyler. My brother.
Your brother? Oh, shit. Huh. I guess I heard about all that, but I never... Damn, you look like a real man.
So do you, Sam.
You know what I mean. I just didn't know they could make a woman look so much like a man.
I froze. I had no idea how to respond to a situation like that. It's actually one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've ever had in a video game. I was so outraged that he'd actually said that, but I was also very aware that I was talking to a drunk guy with a shotgun. Do I call this guy out, or do I let it slide with the understanding that things might get dangerous if I don't? It was not something I felt qualified to choose. Should trans people risk their lives to stand up for who they are? I don't know. I don't want the responsibility of answering that question. Again, I have no reference for if this is good or bad trans representation. All I can tell you is that it was an incredibly effective emotional moment for me. I really felt for Tyler in that moment. I felt the anger and frustration and bitterness of having to explain your very existence to someone who, in all realities, doesn't actually give that much of a shit. If you do call out Sam, he goes off in a tirade about how the kids keep changing the rules and he finds it hard to keep up, when really, referring to Tyler as a man is extremely easy. I mean, look at him. He looks like a dude. He's even got a lower pitched voice than me. Now granted, I take my own biases into the game with me. I was a trans rights advocate long before I played this game. What it did do was give me a newfound appreciation for the trans experience. I've seen online transphobia. It's loud and it is rampant. What this game showed me and helped me understand is actual bigotry. The thing is, transphobes generally can't actually identify if someone is trans by looking at them.
One of these men is a trans. Can you tell which one? Pause the video if you need to and look over their photos, then pick which one you think is trans. Ready? They all are. They're all trans.
So dealing with bigots takes a much different shape. It becomes a game of gauging how much you want to let someone else know about you, trying to gauge what their reaction will be, and dealing with the incredibly awkward reactions when it comes to light. And like I said at the start, if you're trans, I'm assuming this is all extremely obvious to you, unless I'm completely off base, in which case let me know. That was, for me, however, a perspective that I'd never been forced to consider. I generally take my safety for granted. An old drunk dude with a shotgun would still scare the crap out of me, but I wouldn't have any worries about him shooting me based on who and how I am. All of this though is pretty tame, and while it's super important to represent that kind of stuff, it seems unlikely to ruffle any feathers. That maybe doesn't go so well for the other part of trans representation this game does. The examples I've given so far are all from the present day of the game world with an adult Tyler. However, the game also has a strong focus on the childhoods of Tyler and Allison, and here's where the game actually changed my mind about something. Very deep down, I think I was always skeptical of letting children transition. I think I subscribed to the idea that children were not mature enough to make those kind of decisions. Tell Me Why has no patience for that kind of logic. In several key scenes, the game demonstrates that not letting a child transition isn't a sensible or caring choice. It is in fact an act of extreme cruelty, and that is an understanding that, having never experienced gender dysphoria, I had no frame of reference for. Tyler and Allison's powers allow them to watch the ghosts of memories from their past, and so in these flashbacks, Tyler is a little girl, at least on a technicality anyway. He has longer girlish hair, there's even pictures of him wearing a dress. In this way, the game forces you to directly engage with how Tyler was really always a boy. Yes, there are these signifiers of femininity, but even the young Tyler is noticeably trying to reject it. The first memory we see when the twins enter the house is a young Tyler asking to join the hockey team. Pretty innocuous. Then he mentions he wants to cut his hair short. Really short. Then you notice how young Tyler dresses, especially in comparison to young Allison. Muted colours, long sleeves. Like a boy. Now at this point you could still be trying to argue that this is tomboy behaviour, that why can't they just be a boyish girl? The most important memory occurs in the twins' old bedroom. Tyler is desperately searching for his old diary when he remembers the time that Marianne found it.
Mom, where is it? What did you do with it?
What now?
I can't find my diary. I know you stole it. Give it back.
Sweetie, whatever I do, it's just for your benefit.
You read it, didn't you? You had no right to do that.
I have the right to do whatever I need to protect my little girl.
I'm not your girl. I hate you.
You will always be my little girl. And no matter how hard you fight me, I'll fight twice as hard to keep you safe.
Marianne refers to Tyler as her little girl, but young Tyler hates it with a genuine raw emotion that I just have no frame of reference for in my own life. And you can see the scar it's left on even the adult Tyler who has transitioned. A little later on you'd read Tyler's diary and it's a raw, unfiltered sprawl of a child's emotions. Would Mum be happier if I could do what she wanted me to? When she looks at me, she just doesn't see me. I wish I could show her. I wish I could make her understand. I think she doesn't want to. This scene and this journal completely flipped my perspective. The rational, moderate wait until they're older falls apart against the realities of this kind of deep, uncomfortable pain on display here. There is no sugarcoating it. To force a child to endure that pain would be abuse. Now, granted, this is an idea that I was open to, or maybe even wanted to have my mind changed about. I do not think this would be convincing to a hardline conservative Christian. Then again, I don't think a hardline conservative Christian would even pick up the game. But I do think for a lot of people that this is enough. I know there's a stigma attached to getting your politics from media, but the reality is a good piece of art is a much more efficient way to convince someone than an argument. You can argue all day long that blocking a child's transition is abuse, but for someone who has no concept of gender dysphoria, they're probably not going to believe you until they felt that pain for themselves. As I said at the start, I don't know that many trans people, and I certainly don't know any on a personal enough level to have this kind of conversation. A lot of people, especially people older than me, don't even have that. Never met a trans person, never seen one on TV beyond Caitlyn Jenner. They have no understanding of what gender dysphoria even is, let alone what it feels like. And yet that's the same group of people voting on the lives of trans people, and that is a problem that needs to be rectified. This might be my privilege as a cis white guy, but I do not believe people are fundamentally cruel. I think people have a hard time empathizing with things that they don't understand, and I think that the best way to make them understand is through art like this. Tell Me Why is by no means a perfect game. It's too enamoured of that pop fiction mental health issues drama a la 13 Reasons Why, or, well, Life is Strange, that it struggles, for me anyway, to say anything actually meaningful about those topics. Which is a shame, because it is ultimately what the game ends up focusing on. Every example I've used in this video has been from Chapter 1, and that's because pretty much every discussion of trans issues takes a backseat going forward. And I think that's probably for the best, else you risk Tyler being purely defined by his transness. But along with that, the game also pivots away from Tyler himself, with him only having a small playable sequence in Chapter 3, and the final choice ultimately resting on Allison's shoulders, and the game's themes being tied into her trauma. And I don't think Tyler is defined by his transness. He's snarky, he's a bit of a prankster, he's highly opinionated about nature preservation. He has just the coolest jacket. I mean, come on, look at that jacket! Even if some of it didn't work for me, the game is worth the play, and at 6 to 7 hours for a full run through, it's hardly a massive time commitment. It's not the topic of this video, but a shout out as well for the game including several indigenous characters fully integrated into the story. Tell Me Why isn't a masterpiece, but it is a step in the direction of one. My biggest concern in making this video is stepping on toes. I'm concerned that it's not my place to talk about this sort of thing. But I've decided to do it anyway because I think it's important that people like me do talk about it. I think that a lot of us are really bad at seeking out new ideas and perspectives, that a lot of us prefer the comfort and safety of what we know, and that worries me. I think that seeing yourself in media is really nice and really powerful, and I'm not trying to take that power away from representation, but from where I'm sitting, that's never really been a problem for me. For me, what makes representation important is that it exposes boring sisters like me to new ways of existing. It takes ideas that might seem strange and scary and makes them normal, which of course they are, but not if you've never encountered them before. Art, and especially video games, are an incredibly powerful way to instill empathy, and that's why it's important that we make trans games, and especially important that we make more of them. There's one thing that always bugs me. It's a nitpick I've had across the trilogy, which is finally resolved by Andromeda actually, which is you never see any females of the species, and it always bugs me. Did you realise you don't see a female Turian until the Omega DLC in Mass Effect 3? That's the first female Turian.